Well, it's actually kind of nice to be here in person, isn't it? A little bit different. I bet you didn't expect an Aussie accent on the platform when you came. Hopefully you're not going to need a translator for what I talk about today, but if you do need some explanations later on, see me at the booth. So what we're going to talk about is, are your cybersecurity walls future-proof? So let me start by asking this question. Are walls just enough anymore? Well, for an answer to that question, we're going to do a bit of a history lesson. We're going to go back to ancient Babylon. Now, the year is 539 BCE, and the city has a population of about 200,000 people at the time. Ancient Greek historian Herodotus was really impressed by the walls of Babylon. He said they were 56 miles long, 80 feet thick, and 320 feet high. Now, if that wasn't enough, the city sat astride the Euphrates River, which acted as a moat, and it was 65 feet to 260 feet wide in places around the city. The walls had buttressed defence towers all the way around. There were 2 sets of them, and they had enough food and water to outlast any sieging army. So from an ancient world perspective, Babylon looked invincible. But something was going to happen overnight, and it was going to happen when Herodotus said a festival was happening in the city, the night the city fell. Cyrus the Great of the Persian Empire was a motivated attacker, and he found a vulnerability that he could actually exploit, and he did it well. What he did was he diverted the Euphrates River so that the river then dropped to a level that allowed his invading armies to walk up the river, past all the defences, the outer defences of the city, and up into what Herodotus said were little gates that led down to the river that were left open for the festival. The outer section of the city fell before the inner parts even knew what was happening. As a matter of fact, the Nabonidus Chronicle that you'll find in the British Museum to this day says that ancient Babylon fell pretty much without a battle. So they might have felt really safe behind their walls, but somewhat an unexpected set of circumstances led to their downfall very quickly overnight. So how do you feel about your cybersecurity walls knowing that story? You know, we find a certain level of comfort being behind walls. The poet Alice Meynell said those words, "A wall is a safeguard of simplicity." Now, we might think to ourselves, well, cybersecurity solutions are really complex. So how come we're talking about simplicity? Well, it's because attackers have become far more motivated, and they really are stepping up their game. So what we have in the way of walls today is really the baseline of security. It's become the simple part of a security strategy. And in all reality, hackers will just work their way through. They'll barrel through your walls, they'll climb over them, they'll do whatever they have to get through them and into the next stage. And it's because those walls are tested, they're repeatable, and they're known factor. It's the same for the cyber criminals. It's a tested, repeated, and known factor to them as well. They understand the walls. Some of them even help build the walls. So it's not going to be too much of an effort for them to get through those walls. So putting vulnerabilities aside for a moment, what are some things that can leave holes in your walls today? Well, what about end-of-life systems? Now, we know there's been a chip shortage during the pandemic, which has led to an equipment shortage, but some have just been plumb simply not doing a great job on keeping on top of their end-of-life programs. And that's caused a bit of an issue. It'll cause you a compliance issue. If you've got PCI 3.2.1, you're going to have a problem with requirement 6.1 and 6.2. Or in version 4, requirement 12.3.4 specifically calls out end-of-life systems. And it's because everything becomes a magnitude more vulnerable if you can't patch them and keep them up to date. So we can understand why those compliance requirements exist. Now, if you simply can't patch them, you're leaving holes in your walls. And like Cyrus, a motivated attacker is going to utilise that hole and make their way into your systems. But they aren't the only things leaving holes in your walls. Let's have a look at vulnerabilities this year alone, and then we'll take a little bit of a peek into the future. You know, Herodotus said there were little gates that led down to the river that were left open. They're basically vulnerabilities as they are today. You know, there's 179,580 vulnerabilities right now. Now, we know with PCI DSS 3.2.1 and version 4, you need passing scans with nothing of a CVSS score of 4.0 and above. But 89.8% of all vulnerabilities at the moment are CVSS 4.0 and above. So if you find yourself with a vulnerability, it's a pretty good chance you're in a non-compliant state and you're going to need to remediate and rescan again. There are 12,440 new vulnerabilities in the first 6 months of this year alone, and their average score is 6.5. Now, from 2016 to 2017, the number of vulnerabilities over doubled in that year alone, and there have been 1,508 new vulnerabilities every month on average since. Just a few holes in the wall, nothing too big. So if those holes weren't bad enough, wait until you get a load of the battering rams of the future. Now, you might have heard a little bit about quantum computing. I know there was another presentation on it earlier on. But when you talk about quantum computing, you'll hear things like qubits, which are a little easier to explain. It's like a bit of binary information. A qubit is a quantum bit that a quantum computer will produce. Now, you'll also hear the term superposition. Now, I'm going to ask you to imagine a wave because it makes it a little bit easier to explain superpositions. But there are the ability of a quantum computer to be in multiple states at the same time until it's actually measured. And then something amazing happens. It's referred to as a phenomena. When they measure the energy of a superposition, it collapses into a single state with a certain probability. Now, mathematically, they know what that probability of collapsing into a certain state will be. Why it doesn't, they don't know. It's referred to as the measurement problem. And if you figure it out, there's a Nobel Prize in it for you because nobody else knows at the moment. But that's not the only thing they don't know. When it comes to interference and things like quantum entanglement, if you want your minds blown later on this evening, have a look at a video on quantum entanglement. Einstein referred to it as spooky action at a distance. You could take two particles that have been entangled with each other, separate them by galaxies, and they will still communicate with each other faster than the speed of light to the point that it appears instantaneous. It's one of the reasons why quantum computers are so much faster. And there are some great things that you'll get from those exponential speed-ups when it comes to cybersecurity. But what does this all mean in the real world? Well, IBM postulated that if you had to find one item in a list of 1 trillion items, and you only looked at each one for a microsecond, it would take a classic computer 1 week to find the answer. It would take a quantum computer 1 second. Now, there are certainly some impacts that can be had in the security space when you're working at that level of speed. There's some positive aspects. For example, quantum computers can generate a truly fundamentally random number that can be used in cryptography, which is fantastic, a truly random number. But it can also have some controversial applications like the ability to break public key cryptography. Qubits are inherently unstable. They're affected by temperature, they're affected by sound, magnetic fields, even clashing with each other. But if you could generate 4,000 to 6,000 error-free qubits, you would basically be able to break public key cryptography in less than hours. Here's the good news. You need more than 1 million of today's noisier qubits to be able to generate 4,000 to 6,000 error-free qubits. And at the moment, they can only generate 100. So you're sitting there going, phew, we've got plenty of time. You don't. IBM and Google are on a path to get to 1 million qubits by 2030. There's time to still develop some post-quantum cryptography, but can you understand why we refer to it as the battering ram of the future? If you think your walls are okay, wait until you get a load of quantum computing. This is part of what's left of ancient Babylon. It's a pile of ruins today. There's some walls still standing here and there, but this is basically what you get nowadays. What do you think they could have done differently back then to prevent this from actually occurring? Do you think they could have had the gate shut for starters? Maybe put some sentries on all those towers that they had, some guards at the gate, somebody monitoring the moat, somebody sending out scouts into the land to see if there were any invading armies approaching. Do you think if they did all of those things, they might have survived that night? Probably. They had some pretty good defences. So we can end up equally devastated today if we don't look at another way of doing things. So what lessons can we learn from history? Bruce Shiner summed it up well. He says, you can't defend, you can't prevent, The only thing you can do is detect and respond. Now, we aren't saying throw out your walls and your protection systems and all that, but what we are advocating is more focus on detection and response. Now, Mr. Shiner went on to write a report quite a while back, which is still very pertinent today. He said this regarding the future of incident response. He said that at a tactical level, security is both a product and a process. Really, it's a combination of people, processes, and technology. What changes are the ratios. So what you see up there today are the ratios that we're looking at. Protection systems. Well, that's some technology with some help from people and processes. Your detection systems are an equal portion of people, processes, and technology. But incident response is mostly people, with some crucial help from technology and processes. Incident response needs people because incident response needs thinking. Your technology that you have shouldn't replace your people, it should help your people, which means it's going to take a little bit of investment in your people, and it's going to take some training and some tabletop exercise and red team versus blue team and so forth. All of those types of things will need to be done. We'll talk a little bit about that at the moment, but you need the people to be invested in what you're doing as well. So what can put some focus on a detection and a response capability? Well, start by looking at your attack surface. You know, QSAs are really good at identifying scope, and I'm sure there's quite a few here in the room today, but you look at everything, don't you? System components that store, process, transmit cardholder data, anything that has unrestricted connectivity to a CDE, anything that can impact the security of a CDE. You take that same level of scrutiny and apply it to your attack surfaces, and everything has an attack surface. I mean, I looked at an attack surface of a car when I was first putting this together and my hair stood up. But just look at just the home and your attack surfaces you have there. Your cameras at the front, do you know where it's transmitting data and where the data lands and is that secure? Do you know what ZigBee is and what that impacts and what the security holes are in relation to that? Or with the Internet of Things now impacting your physical security because your front door locks are connected to it. Well, how many mum and dads actually changed the default router password? Everything has an attack surface. Now look at your more complex environments that you're all running, data centers, third parties, the cloud and so forth. And think outside the box. Look at the digital, look at the physical, look at the social engineering aspects, but also outside the box with things like supply chains. Are they a part of your attack surface or are they an attack vector that you've got to keep an eye on? It helps establish your detection and response capability because now you know where to put more focus on your detection aspects and what your responses should be in that environment. What else can help with a detection and response capability? Zero trust architecture. You go, oh, not that again. But it's been around for quite a while. It's not something new. In reality, NIST defined it as focused on resource protection on the premise that trust is never granted implicitly but continually evaluated. Now, interestingly, Gartner had a conference in Sydney just not that long ago, and they had their top 8 cybersecurity predictions. And one of them was there up on the screen. 60% of organisations will embrace zero trust as a starting point for security in 2025, but only half of them, or less than half of them, would fail to realise its benefits. So how can zero trust architecture help with the detection and response capability? Well, zero trust architecture combined with contextual trust algorithms is where you want to be at. So what's a contextual trust algorithm? Well, your HR person typically looks at 25 records per day, every day, 25 to 30. Now all of a sudden they want access to 100 records, but you know that they normally only access 25 to 30, so do you alert? Do you look at what they should do in the way of more authentication? Or your accounts person. They typically work in the office 9 to 5 every single day, but all of a sudden they're at an undisclosed location at an IP address you don't recognise, and it's 1 a.m. in the morning and they want access to 100 records. What do you do then? Alert? Certainly make them jump through some more authentication hoops. Now, contextual trust algorithms are going to take a little bit of development and a little bit of time to put them together, but can you see how it can squeeze down your mean time to detect and your mean time to respond by implementing that as part of your zero trust architecture? But the records sort of like show we're not doing a great job of it. Back in Australia, the Australian government has what they call the Notifiable Data Breach Act. You have to tell the government when you've been breached if it impacts an individual and it impacts their safety. And they keep some pretty good statistics. Now, they have one there, time taken to identify breaches. You know, 20% or more took longer than 30 days to identify that they'd actually been breached. What's really scary is the other 80%, there's no more granular information. They could have all taken up to 30 days to be identified. 5% took 365 days or longer, or didn't even know they had been breached. 15% took longer than 61 days. The Australian government made this observation. They said a notable portion of entities experienced system faults and did not become aware of them for over a year. People are key to reducing your mean time to detect and your mean time to respond and to get rid of these types of numbers. But they're going to need some solid training. It's the reason why security operations centres have people. It's because they're the ones that are going to act on what they see. So what do we need to do? We need to train them really well. You know, quite a while back, I learned how to fly. And there's a lot to learn. There's things like communications, instrumentation. You know what a funny story about communications with the towers? See you later. But some of the things that they do to train you is repetition. So they'll make you do touch and goes on the runway all year round, like over and over again, until they let you out into the wild blue yonder with an instructor. Now, one day I was flying along and my instructor reached across and he turned off the throttle. Now, if you can imagine, all I was seeing in the window was a prop doing this every now and again. So that's a good way to get your heart started, right? Now, there was a field to the right and a road to the left. And he says, what are you going to do? I said, okay, I'm going to land in that field over there. So I turned the plane, put it the nose up, flaps down, started to glide towards that field. That's the point when he questioned my decision. He said, well, what about the road to the left? Why not go there? And I'd already dismissed it based on my training because I saw all the traffic on there and I saw the power lines and I thought that was a dangerous place to land. So I stuck to my guns. What's the lesson? Repetition and drills can make reaction times so much faster and decisions so much more accurate. Surprise your teams when you actually are conducting exercises. Don't tell them it's coming. It's been 25 years since that lesson and I haven't forgotten it. So if you surprise them, they will remember it. Red team versus blue team exercises, a little bit of healthy competition never hurt anybody. Then once you've done all that, review your processes. Who is authorised to make a call? What's your position on ransomware? What are your setups with your third parties for access and log availability? Look at all of those things. Focus on what can reduce your response time. So what have we learnt overall? Well, Babylon and its huge walls fell overnight to a motivated attacker who saw a vulnerability and took advantage of it that could have been shut down with a detection and response strategy. With risks and advancements in technologies nowadays, we can't just hide behind walls anymore. Shore up your detection and response capabilities by looking at things like zero trust architecture combined with contextual trust algorithms. Look at investing in people and their training. Scrutinise and reduce your attack surfaces and review and test your incident processes. Quantum computers can really be a battering ram for the future, but they can also be part of the solution. So keep up to date with tech advancements. If we don't want to end up ruined like ancient Babylon, we really need to shore up our detection and response capabilities. Thank you.